government entity is able to go and procure your solution or do further research and development with you without having to recompete, which can make it a lot easier on the government folks who are trying to work with you. So in a way, that becomes your hunting license to sell more efficiently throughout the government. And that is phase 3. The reality is you don't need to do this phase 2 first. You don't need to do a really big bet. The moment you're in the phase 1 pipeline, you're eligible for that phase 3. So something to have in mind is another benefit to the program. I did talk about the focus areas briefly. So we do this by one single open topic per cycle. So it's a very large topic. And we say anyone with a perceived dual use solution, meaning there's a commercial market as well as a potential defense market, can apply for this program. And that's really good for the push scenario, i.e. you've got a piece of tech and you say, I think someone wants that in the Air Force. But for the pull scenario, where we as Air Force members want to be able to go out to industry and say, hey, we need something, do you have a solution? That's where these focus areas come into play. Right? So we ping throughout the Air Force every round and we say, hey, what solutions are you looking for? Or even better, what problems do you have for which you're willing to be brought solutions? And it results in this numbered list of focus areas, which when the solicitation posts, that's one of those things where you can match up against the focus areas and say, hey, even though I can potentially find a customer during phase 1, if I go into this knowing who my customer might be, or at least that there is a validated need somewhere for my solution, that gives you a leg up. And upon that phase 1 award, you're connected immediately to the sponsors of those focus areas, right? So it's a way for us to put our needs out there and a way for you to be more efficiently connected to your customers and your users inside the Air Force. Some things that are important about getting to phase 2, for those of you that are wondering. One is open dialogue. We encourage the government members to be very open in their conversations with you as the potential providers during the course of phase 1. We actually drive and we encourage you to get all the stakeholders involved early. So in the Air Force and more broadly in the DoD, we have the end user organizations who are conducting the mission, and we have acquisitions organizations who are acquiring the solutions on behalf of those end users. So it's kind of an interesting relationship. And then we have technologists and S&Es inside the labs who are very deeply knowledgeable on these different tech verticals, right? And so we've got these 3 players, and what we say is for any solution to have the highest likelihood of success, try to get those 3 players involved as early as possible. I mentioned that customer memo, which you see on the bottom right there. That is the bar to even be eligible for the phase 2. One of the things you'll notice about this memo is that it requires those parties to be talking to each other and to be involved as early as possible. I also mentioned the colliders. So this is one thing where we recognize that it's hard to find your customer amid so many hundreds of thousands of employees in the Air Force. The Collider event brings together hundreds of solution providers with hundreds of potential customers across many different career fields and tech verticals to try to result in those collisions that lead to deal flow. So there's one per cycle as a way to help to grease the skids on finding your Air Force customer. I want to pass it now to Jared to speak briefly on the STTR topic, which is, again, it's one of the big programs that we have coming down the pipe now. Over to you, Jared.
Hey, thanks, Steve, and welcome everybody. Just to build on the great messaging that Steve has put out here just over the last few minutes, the STTR program, which is the Small Business Technology Transfer Program, follows the model that Steve has laid out thus far, and provides all of you guys a great opportunity to jump into the process. And there's a few things we want to touch on specifically here. So first of all, eligibility, right? You have to be a U.S. owned, primarily small business, right? In terms that we use in our small business portfolio, that's less than 500 people, right? So still fairly significant in by most metrics. Number 2, it must be registered, and it must be listed as being able to be awarded U.S. government contracts. That's something that you do by getting a DUNS number and a SAM number as well. Ultimately, number 3, in order to jump into the process, you have to submit a proposal, right? And there's two main pieces of this in terms of the STTR program that you need to satisfy in order to be able to move forward. First of all, you must have an eligible research or nonprofit institution partner that will complete at least 30% of the work plan that you propose. Additionally, the small business must complete at least 40% of that work plan. Certainly, there are more details that go into making a proposal, but those are some kind of non-negotiables that we have to abide by per U.S. statute. So I want to make sure that we highlight those up front. One of the things that I wanted to make sure we bring up as well is that these solicitations are listed on BetaSam, and we have two that will be opening. One is open right now, and the other will be coming up very soon in coordination with the SBIR solicitations as well. So the first of all is the X20D open topic supporting agility prime concept. Those proposals are due on the 10th of August by 2 p.m. If you haven't seen the solicitation for that, you can check out that on BetaSam, and or you can come join at our AMA Ask Me Anything webinar on 3 August. The link for that will be on the Agility Prime website, which is listed right there later today. And you can also find out much more information about Agility Prime writ large and how STTR is feeding the technology development in the flying car space in particular. And then secondly, the X20.C open topic, which is a broad open topic that Steve has mentioned earlier. The pre-solicitation for that is scheduled to open on the 25th of August, so later next month, technically, here in just about 3 to 4 weeks. So with that, I will hand it back over to Steve and to Joey, and we'll continue to answer questions in the chat as well. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, really well said, Jared. And that actually spurs another question of what is the eligibility for SBIR? So the same rules around U.S. owned and controlled small business, which is less than 500 employees, including affiliates, so something to consider there as well, applies for SBIR just as it does for STTR. So those, of course, will all be included in the solicitation as they're released, both for X20.C STTR and for 20.3, the SBIR, are going into pre-release on August 25th. BetaSam does have these solicitations, but also if you just Google or you search for SBIR portal, the first hit will be this DoD SBIR portal. And you can see a link for it there on the application link section. But that has the solicitation as well. And that's ultimately where you're going to need to create an account to be able to apply. So recommend checking that out as well. Joey, did we miss anything big there? Any pylons that you have?
No, you guys crushed it. So I appreciate that. We are going to head over to questions. And I think we've answered all of the things in chat. So we would love to have some live Q&A during this. So if you're willing to raise your hand, we'll unmute you and we can have a conversation. Also, we'll continue answering questions in chat. So please put something in there and we're happy to answer. What do you not understand? What do you want to know more about? Throw us the hard questions.
Hi, how's it going? Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Great. My question is really about the SBIR program. So my company is currently going through the phase 1 process with the NSF, which I know is technically separate within the government. I'm curious, is it possible / how difficult is it to transfer between government agencies for the SBIR program?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll take a stab at it, then Joey and Jared, if you've got anything else. There is a precedent and there is a process for it. It's called a cross-agency transfer, or you'll also hear it called a topic transfer. That said, it's a little bit different from organization to organization. So I can't speak for NSF's policies on this. Within the Air Force side, it ends up just going through a workflow that gets up to our deputy director and the director for Air Force SBIR. But I have heard that it needs to go higher in some cases when you're going from within DoD to outside of DoD or vice versa. So it's hard to say for that particular organization. My recommendation would be to get with your TPOC or your PM for that effort to discuss their specific policies.
Scott, I believe you have a question next.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. I'm familiar with venture and the commercial space and angel investment, but the Air Force SBIRs and STTRs, it's all new to me. So here's a village idiot question from me. Like, what's the difference between an SBIR, STTR? I saw the slides, but just help me out on that one. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So the high level on SBIR is it's the Small Business Innovative Research Program, right? So targeted specifically at small businesses, as we talked about, who are doing innovative research. And so when it comes to, are you creating something new? Are you developing a solution further? This is actually a very broadly mandated program. And the way it works is that all of our overall budget is quote unquote taxed by a certain percentage that says it has to be spent on these small businesses doing innovative research. Part of the beauty of this program is that the funds are undifferentiated from day one. And you'll notice if you try to work elsewhere in the government, in many cases that can be difficult because from day one, the budget is even though it's a lot of money for the whole DoD, it's very specific about what each of those dollars is going to be spent on. Right? Whereas with this budget, it's open from year to year. And we say, we don't know from day one what exactly it's going to go towards. And that gives you some freedom of movement and us some freedom of movement to find things that are really compelling that we didn't know we needed yet and to quickly move on those. And I'll use that as the benchmark. Jared, do you want to talk about some of the key differences between SBIR and STTR?
Sure. No, thanks, Steve. Ultimately, SBIR and STTR both, they're independent programs, but they're very similar. And they're both, together, they constitute kind of the small business portfolio for Air Force Ventures and the Air Force at large. And some of the major things that to keep in mind in terms of differences is that SBIR, there is a requirement for the technology to be kind of in the commercial space in some way, shape, or form, whether that be just commercially available for purchase or, with getting investment and that kind of thing in the commercial space. For STTR, they can be a completely pre-sales, pre-seed type of concept that you're proposing to the Air Force and the DoD writ large. There are also some differences in the principal investigator and the roles that they can play. Certainly, the requirement for a research institution is in place for STTR, but does not exist for SBIR. So SBIR, small business can come to the government by themselves and propose. In STTR, they must have a research institution to complete at least 30% of that work plan. There are some other kind of nuanced difference in the principal investigator being able to work at that research institution in the case of STTR, and with SBIR, they must work with that small business specifically. So there are other smaller differences, but those are kind of the big rocks.
Awesome. Hey, Steve, we got an interesting question that I would love to discuss. It's from Hugo. Do you provide additional funding opportunities to startup and SMEs for R&D projects after phase 2 that are targeted to specific partnerships with a larger company? So I think his question is coming from the fact that I think he says he works for Airbus in parentheses. So,
really good question. So the answer is no, but I want to elaborate on it a little bit. So no, we don't have any programs, at least right now under our purview, that are specifically targeted at encouraging partnerships with large companies and small companies. That said, I think there's a very vital role that large companies can play in this overall phase 2 and beyond process, right? So one of the things I mentioned is both for phase 2 and for that next step, those big bets, there is either encouraged matching funding or, for the case of the big bets, required matching funding. And we didn't go into a lot of detail of what exactly that means, but there's a couple things that to us qualifies matching. From the government, it's very clear. There are dollars that are going to expand the scope of the project in some way. But for private, what qualifies? There tends to be 4 benchmarks for something to qualify. And I'm going to quickly go through those because it has bearing here. The first is that it must be cash. It cannot be an in-kind investment because those are fairly difficult to quantify. The second is that it can't come from an affiliate, i.e. you couldn't invest in yourself or something similar like that, right? We're trying to create or trying to prevent perverse incentives from occurring here. The third is that it can't be repaid in cash, i.e. it's not a loan. And then finally, it must be aimed at decreasing the commercial or technical risk of the solution. And that's really a big one there. So what it's saying is, if you just point to sales of the solution, that's not necessarily a matching fund scenario. But if, for instance, a larger amount of money was going into the V1 of a solution, that could be deemed as a pre-sale, i.e. that larger amount of money is buying down the technical and commercial risk such that it can be scaled and sold at quantity, right? So nowhere in those 4 rules do we say it has to be venture or it has to be angel investment, or it has to be private equity. And so the reason I bring this up is if you are a large corporation making strategic bets or strategic investments of some sort, that could be something that qualifies for the purposes of matching. And that's one of your tools, one of your levers that you have to get companies with solutions that you care about to succeed and thrive throughout this program. One of the things we do for phase 2 companies, of which we have over 400 at this point, is we share with them a list of large organizations that would like to make themselves available to those phase 2 companies as potential partners. We don't tell them they have to partner, but we just want them to know who is the POC at those big primes, those big organizations, if they did want to. So if you would like to put yourself out there as one of those POCs and one of those organizations, shoot one of us an email after this, and we'll talk maybe. Joey, what do you think is the best way to get that info out to people so they can reach out?
So we could post it on the AFWERX site, or we could also do a follow-up with the participants from, we can get the Fusion email list.
Okay, let's do it that way because, yeah, we definitely can update our roster of interested larger businesses and working with those phase 2 SBIR companies to make available for them.
Yeah.
Small businesses.
Also want to answer something from Patrick about the direct to phase 2s. So we do have the direct to phase 2 option for SBIR in the past. We're still looking at that for this next round for 20.3, and our official pre-release information will come out on 25 August. So check out the website for more information and we'll push it out.
Steve, I believe Brian has an additional question.
Okay.
Hey, Steve and Joey, Brian Meyer with AFWERX, 18.3 cohort. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Hey, just wanted to follow up with what Joey just answered. You mentioned 20.3 having potential direct to phase 2. Are you 20.c? Is that going to have a direct to phase 2, or do you know yet?
Jared?
So the STTR program does not have a direct to phase 2 opportunity. That is just an SBIR pilot that we're working with. So if you're interested in the STTR program, the phase 1 solicitation is the single front door to that process. One thing I didn't mention on my slide a little earlier is that the X20D supporting Agility Prime is a little bit different variables than the regular open topic. Given the scenario that we find ourselves in nowadays with COVID and all of the other kind of strenuous issues that we see in the world, the X20D is actually going to be over 6 months and has a contract value of $150K for phase 1. So there's a variety of reasons there, not the least of which is providing some reliable funding streams for a little bit longer period of time. So not just going from 3 months to 6 months. Our open topic for X20C, we expect to be kind of the standard 3 months and $50K. So that's an important detail to think about.
Okay, thanks guys, appreciate you.
Steve, I had one input too for the larger business conversation that was just a question or two ago. Both SBIR and STTR can accommodate the large business partnership. SBIR, small businesses can partner up to 33% with a subcontractor to include large businesses. And for STTR, the research institution must take up at least 30% of the work plan, and the small business must do at least 40%. That leaves a 30% trade space there, where a small business can partner with a large business, or either the small business itself or the research institution, and can complete. So that 30% leaves some trade space there as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
One additional question I did see come up in the chat was in regards to that research institution. I know we talk about nonprofits, we talk about universities. There is actually a formal definition of that research institution term that is in the policy directive. It includes nonprofits and it has other specifics in there. I'm not sure if it will fit in the chat box, but we will try just for everyone's reference. But it is also in other presentations that is on the AFWERX website or Agility Prime website as well. So
yeah, and just to plug for Jared, they're doing another AMA on, I believe, 3 August. So if you want to jump in and learn more about STTR, please go there. Also check out the AFWERX.af.mil site. If you go there and for the private sector, you'll see more information on the SBIR open topics and the STTR open topics. I posted the links in the chat, and I'm happy to post them again to share some information. So please ask questions in chat or raise your hand. We're happy to take a few more.
And as Joey mentioned, they're in the solicitation as well. So.
Steve, I don't think we've ever had a presentation where we end questions early. So I think you've started to nail it on the head. That
or people are so
big
confused that they don't know what questions to ask. In which case, sorry.
This is the feedback we need. So please share it with us. We're trying to learn and adopt this process. So this is a new effort and a growing effort, and you have a team of folks on this side who want to hear your feedback and want to hear your concerns so we can address them.
I do see a question from Patricia here in the chat, talking about a particular partnership with Arizona State University Research Enterprise. I do not know the details of that particular organization, but as long as they meet the definition of that research institution that's listed in policy, is listed in the solicitation as well, then the answer to that question is yes. Again, the percentage is very important, and then they also have to be eligible as well. So as long as those 2 boxes are checked, you're able to potentially move forward.
Steve, another great question that came up, thanks actually to Jen Savada, is how do companies find potential Air Force customers? How do they start this conversation if they've never worked with the DoD before?
Yeah, really great question. So part of this is, the reason for phase 1 is not just to kind of pay for the overhead of doing this feasibility study for you and considering us as the customer. There's also a curriculum that's delivered throughout those 90 days that is teaching you different aspects of how to find your customer in the Air Force, how to work with the Air Force, what are the things that are going to be needed, the boxes you'll need to check to ultimately transition your solution to the field. In some cases, you're going to need to get authority to operate on our software systems. In some cases, you'll need to get certain waivers to fly a certain aircraft in a certain way, right? So there's all these nuanced details that really will affect the success of your project. And those are delivered as a curriculum during the course of phase 1. It's a weekly meeting with every one of those phase 1 companies per cohort that addresses things like this. Now, in general, there's a couple of things that we can do that we directly provide to help you finding those customers. I mentioned the Collider events already. A number of those folks who have successfully transitioned to phase 2 met their customers at one of those Collider events. We are working on software solutions that help to more seamlessly connect those in phase 1 to those with needs. So you can think of it as a Netflix or Tinder for user needs meeting with solutions, right? We're working on that too, so not released yet. We did a beta round of this last time. And then there's the focus areas as well, which kind of intelligently connect those sponsors with needs inside the Air Force with those companies that have solutions. Beyond that, though, there are a number of things that are outside of the AFWERX ecosystem that help you to find your customers as well. I think a great example is called Tech Connect, and actually the Air Force Front Door program that is via AFRL, where they're helping you to navigate those systems. What we're going to do is we're going to provide a list of, once you're in phase 1, a list of those best practices, those external resources, as well as those internal resources that I just talked about to help you get there. Now, even with all of that assistance, the reality is we put a lot of responsibility on you as an entrepreneur to perform that customer discovery and to find your customer. And so whether that's hiring a veteran, going on LinkedIn to help find people, there are right ways and wrong ways about cold calling or cold emailing people, but sometimes it is appropriate. And so we want to give you the left-right balance. We want to give you guidance, but at the end of the day, we put a lot of responsibility on the company to find that customer inside the Air Force. Does that make sense? Or anything else you wanted to add, Joey or Jared?
Yeah, we know it sounds hard and difficult, but we've had over an 80% success rate for companies that take these practices and start engaging in a kind, polite way with the Air Force customer. Mm-hmm. And they're finding someone to work with that has a problem that maybe their solution can solve. And so it's about having that conversation, doing a lot of the customer discovery interviews, and asking the right questions about, hey, what is the problem you're trying to get after? Who can you introduce me to? It is a short timeline, but as Steve said, finding the right people to work with, partnering with them, applying to be part of our phase 1 cohort is an important part of this process.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one piece that maybe folks don't always appreciate, especially those not in government, is that what happens if you don't have this program, right? If a small business were to come to an Air Force customer and said, hey, I can solve all your problems, come check this out. That Air Force customer is going to have a hard time really facilitating that, right? Whether it be the fact that they don't know who you are and you don't really have the legal basis to have some of these conversations and to talk about the Air Force need in a particular area, whether it's having the contracting expertise or the program management expertise to kind of run that contract and run that effort in the first place, right? Because these operators, they've got to work with what they have in front of them. They have kind of the regular job to do, right? And so when you go on phase 1 and you're finding that Air Force demand signal, what we're doing in essence is giving both you as the small business and giving our government POCs is the legal basis to have these more substantive conversations, and then the process and the system in which to operate moving forward, right? Not only are you using AFWERX funding, not only are you using the contracting and program management expertise of the program, we're freeing up the government users and the operational community writ large to engage with you on a real level without having the programmatic overhead of what would have to happen otherwise. And so there's value propositions all the way across. One thing I typed in the links not only for the Agility Prime STTR, but for the solicitation itself. When I first typed them in, I messed up the formatting, so that's my fault. But I did a repeat there. So if the link you click doesn't work at first, you may look at my updated comment there. Thank you.
So there was an interesting question about how does being a finalist in these challenges relate to the phase 1 requirement to find interested parties in the Air Force. So the AFWERX Fusion event and the showcase is a great opportunity, just like the Collider events, to talk to Air Force customers and personnel. We had over 6,000 people register for the Fusion event. We have thousands of people attending the showcase from both commercial and military side. So it's a great opportunity for you to talk to customers that are interested in your problem set. And the AFWERX challenge process is going through a commercial solutions opening. So it is a different contract vehicle than the SBIR STTR process we talked about here. But if you find an Air Force customer and you're interested in applying for the SBIR STTR process, then you're welcome to do that. Let's say, but one key note there is you can't be awarded a contract for the same work twice. So if you do win a Base of the Future contract, then you can't do the same work through the SBIR STTR option. But we're trying to give you as many options as possible. The bets we take through the ventures process are just that. They're bets. We don't know if they're going to work out, but we want to try different things.